Today, our guest is someone you might recognize from Saved by the Bell, or maybe Dick Tracy, or maybe some of the most iconic commercials of all time. Remember the FedEx guy from the early 80s or the Micro Machines guy? Well, if you haven't guessed it yet, we mentioned his Guinness World Record for fast talking in our last episode. That's right. Today, we are pleased to be sharing our mics with none other than Motormouth himself, John Moschitta Jr. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Tim and Greg. I'm really happy to be here. I have nothing better to do on a Friday morning, so I figured I'd talk to you guys. I guess you guys look pretty cool, and I thought your show looks pretty good, and I think I wanted to just participate in it. So I figured I'd just give, push a button, and there I am.
Awesome. That's our fastest episode ever.
There we go.
So thank you, and good night.
Exactly. Very cool.
Awesome. Our podcast has a lot to do with reminiscing about the great things from our childhood, John. Any great moments from your youth that you would like to share?
Well, I remember my grandfather took me to the United Methodist Church of New Hyde Park on Long Island to meet, of all people, Mel Blanc.
Wow. That's awesome.
Why Mel Blanc was at the United Methodist Church of New Hyde Park in the basement signing autographs and doing whatever, I don't know, but he was there. I was just little, and I remember just sitting there being mesmerized by this guy doing Bugs Bunny, doing Porky Pig, doing Daffy Duck, it just was amazing. And it just seemed so surreal to me that here he was in this church basement.
That's so cool. Yeah. Was he nice? Was he,
He was very nice.
Yeah.
He was very nice. And then I actually, years later, decades later, I worked for his son, Noah, who was in charge of Radio Free Europe. That the stuff that they beamed to all the servicemen and all that kind of stuff. So I did a bunch of shows for him. So it came full circle with the family.
Yeah, that's so cool. So cool. So, you mentioned that, that happened when you were a younger man. I saw that you first got interested in the career that you have sustained all these years when you're around 12 years old. And I saw some little details about that there was a fundraiser and there were a lot of different ideas you had about, maybe riding a roller coaster or something like that to break a world record. Can you kind of speak to that?
Well, I used to, every winter, Cerebral Palsy used to have a telethon in New York. And it was hosted by Dennis James and this woman, Jane Pickens, who talked like this. And she would say, "Look at us, we're walking. Look at us, we're talking. Those of us who've never walked or talked before." And I would go out in the freezing cold and knock door to door to collect money for Cerebral Palsy. And I'd freeze my ass off and raise about $11.04. Come back, call in the station just so I could hear little Johnny Moschitta in Uniondale collected $11.04. So I was a media hog already at a very young age. I used to read the newspaper for local community theater productions and whatever else. And I saw this ad that they were going to be setting up a Guinness booth at this charity fair. And anyone that broke a Guinness record, they were going to donate money to Cerebral Palsy, of all things. So, and it was $2,000. And I thought, well, hey, freeze your ass for 11.14 or get in the Guinness book and get $2,000 donated. So first I wanted to ride the roller coaster at Coney Island, and I called Coney Island, and they said, "Hey, kid, take a hike. 12 years old. We're not going to let you drive yourself into the cyclone for 2 weeks straight." I went home and I started flipping through the book and decided I wasn't going to eat a car, swallow lead pipe. So the next best thing was to lock myself in a room and teach myself how to do the fast talking. I also had 5 sisters, so I had a little bit of a head start.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I heard that you had an interesting choice as far as your first piece that you tried to speed to, or talk really fast over. Was it Hamlet that I read? Is that what it was?
Well, that was what the record was set with at the time.
Okay.
There were 2 talking records. One was extemporaneous talking, which was held by John F. Kennedy, who was being heckled at a crowd, and then he lambasted the heckler at like almost 400 words a minute.
Wow.
So he was in for the public speaking extemporaneous award. And then the other record was set by the to be or not to be soliloquy. So that's what I had to teach myself. Of course, I didn't know any, I was 12 years old. Who knew to be or not to be that? So I just learned it and I did it over. When you're 12 years old, you do anything 20 hours a day. You don't care.
Sure.
And I would bring my sisters in and kind of torture them. I would make them sit down and I would do it and say, "What did I just say?" Which of course they couldn't tell me because it was Shakespearean English. But I did that. And then I showed up to do it. And unfortunately, they had no one there to verify that kind of record. They only had someone there to verify physical records, like the most hot dogs eaten, the most balls spinning, the most plates thrown. There was no one there to do my thing. So it did not become a record at the time. And pretty much for the next 15 years, I was told to shut up. Uh, and then someone decided to pay me money for it, and it worked out great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is fantastic. John, as Tim noted in the intro, you have some amazing 80s street cred. You were in one of the most iconic movies of my childhood, Transformers the movie.
Oh, yeah.
You played Blur the Autobot. And of course,
Decepticons, well, we have a place to look and see Decepticons. I'm in a stupid mission, but the stupidest mission I've ever been on.
And of course, Transformers the movie has the infamous scene where Optimus Prime dies, which forever scars thousands of kids. Did you see the whole script? Did you know that was going to happen?
I had no idea what was happening.
Okay.
As they do with most, sometimes they try to get the whole cast together. At that time in the 80s, I was very, very busy. I was never in one place for longer than 4 hours. So I did most of the episodes I did for the TV show, and for the movie I did by myself. But as it turns out, there were so many big stars in the movie, like Orson Welles required nobody else be in the studio. And, everybody had rules and things. So most people ended up doing it yourself. So all you do is your lines. You don't even see anybody else's lines. They just give you your lines. You read them. They might tell you what's happening, but you don't know. And then they sent Robert Stack was in the movie, very nice guy. And they sent he and I out on a press tour. And we went all over the country. And we ended up in New York. He took half the shows. I took half the shows. And that night was the premiere. And they had been just hammering home to us, this is a family movie. There's no violence. So we're on these shows talking about, it's a family movie. It's for everybody, blah, 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 blah. And then we go to see this movie, and it's nothing but explosions, acid rock music. And the two of us were like, oh, my God, we have just convinced all these families to take their pure, innocent little children to see this movie.
Oh, that's so funny.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that most of it was done sort of, in isolation. You weren't necessarily with, the actors and stuff like that, but were there any times where you, were with some actors, maybe your first time?
Well, for the daytime, for the TV version, I got to do several of the episodes with the whole cast, and that was great. Because you're sitting there with Dick Gaudier and Roger C. Carmel and Scatman Crothers and, just these amazing people, and talking about your struts melting. I mean, it was great.
Yeah.
Everyone, it was really fun. And I was always upset when I had to miss one of the group sessions, because it just was like, whatever. And then the Transformers animated, the next version that I did several of them in the studio as well, but that was that was Mark Hamill and, Peter Isaacson, and just a bunch of really great people in that one too. And that was fun. And that was 2 minutes from my house, so that made it even nicer.
Yeah. Now, did you ever have any starstruck moments where you met Mark Hamill or someone like that, and you were like, "Oh, this is awesome," or were you always sort of it just felt
the only person that I really got starstruck with, where it just I was gaga, was I did a singing dancing number on the Emmys with commercial people. It was Josephine the plumber and the Chow 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 lady and all these, the Maytag repairman and all these people. It was a nightmare, but we did that. And that year, Lucille Ball was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
And she was known to be a little bit on the fussy side. And they had built her a little separate area backstage, and they weren't letting anybody go in there. And she and I have the same birthday. And out in California, there's one of the local channels, Channel 5 KTLA, on August 6th, they run 24 hours of I Love Lucy episodes. So I used to spend my birthday when I moved to California by just laying on the couch, doing what you do when you lay on the couch, and watch reruns of I Love Lucy. So I managed to sneak into this little area where they had her.
Yeah.
And I went up, and I was nervous as hell because it's, Lucille Ball. And I introduced myself, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh, aren't you sweet? And you know what? I just loved you when you were on." And then she named 6 things she had seen me on. And oh my God, I was like, "Oh, Lucille Ball, that's who I am. I've made it."
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that.
Cool. kind of going along with that commercial, all those famous commercial, I know I didn't know this before. I did a little research that you worked with one of the most famous commercial directors, Joe, how do you say his name? I wrote it down. Settlemeyer. When you were doing those FedEx commercials, did you realize it was something special?
Well, I'll tell you what the clue was. When I showed up, well, first of all, we thought the commercial was going to get canceled because Reagan got shot. And it was like, all right, I get the phone calls. If he dies, we have to cancel the shoot because it's going to be a national day of mourning. Yeah. So I'm like, pull through. And luckily he didn't die. And the original version, they were doing 9 commercials for Federal Express. And my commercial was the only one that Joe Settlemeyer didn't cast. They had seen me on That's Incredible, and they came up with the idea to use me for this, and they were making him, and he said, okay, I'm doing 9 commercials. You're only going to run 7 of them. So, I'll just do it because you want me to do it and whatever. So their original concept was 14 scenes in 30 seconds. So like the boardroom, all they had me saying was, thanks for taking this meeting. And that was it. Mm-hmm. So I walk in at 6 o'clock in the morning and meet Joe Settlemeyer for the first time. And reputation up the wazoo of being the biggest pain in the ass to work with, just a horrible person, someone that will belittle you, turn you to, tears in a puddle and, whatever. And I introduced myself and he said, hello. And I said, I'd like to talk to you about the script. And all of a sudden, dead silence in the room. And he goes, oh, you'd like to talk about the script, would you? I was like, oh, shit. He goes, what about the script? I said, well, it's not, what I do is not really funny if it's 3 words. It's only funny if it's like a paragraph. And they said, well, and the first scene up was going to be the boardroom. And I said, well, what would you like to say? So needless to say, I had given it a bit of thought before I showed up. And I said, well, how many people are going to be around the room? And he said 9, and I pointed to them. And the 9 people, by the way, were all in barber chairs getting the exact same bald spot cut into the back of their head. And that's how precise this guy is. So I pointed to the first 9 people and I wrote that down, their names. And I thought I'd say something like, and in conclusion, Jim, Bill, Bob, Colford, logo, get it, business. We all know to get something done, you got to do something, got to do something, got to get to work. So let's get to work. Thanks for taking this meeting. And he just looked at it and he went, I think that will work. And then before each scene, we'd go in the room with the writer, Patrick Kelly, and Joe and I. And it's okay, let's do all P's next time. So we did, Pete, you did a bang job putting Pittsburgh, perfect. I know it's perfect, Pete, that's why I picked Pittsburgh. Let's do, D's, David to deal with the dealer, we're dealing, David to deal with Don, let's deal with Dick to deal with David, let's deal with Doc, gotta go, David's connecting, gotta go, Dennis connecting. And there's actually, Joe and I, so we hit it off. We got along great. We still talk. We're 40 years later.
Cool.
He always wanted to call characters Load and Dork, L-O-A-D and Dork. And the censors would not let him call them Load and Dork. So at the boardroom, we have Jim, Bill, Bob, Carl, Fred, Load, Dork, Adolf, and Ted, which nobody caught. Then at the end, we're finally getting to the question you asked. In the very last scene, what we did, the very last scene that day was Pittsburgh's Perfect. The Pittsburgh Perfect guy couldn't say Pittsburgh Perfect on time. It took 65 takes. We didn't end up finishing the commercial. No one from the ad agency is allowed on his sets and whatever. Next morning, we showed up and there's like 50 people there. Everybody taking credit for the commercial. So we're like, we must have been doing something right yesterday. Yes. They were all here today. So all we had left was the last scene at me at the desk on the telephone, going, Dave, what's the deal with the dealing? Are we dealing? Dave, what's the deal with Don? What's the deal with Dick? And, okay. And then they lean back and a package comes across. Well, then in typical Madison Avenue bullshit style, should we do a envelope? Should we do a big box? A little box? A small box? Should we have the tube? Do we want to see the person's hands? Do we not want to see the person's hands? Do we want to see the box? So I did 24 or 26 takes perfectly without making a mistake, with them coming in with different boxes and whatever else. And Joe says to me, what are you, like a machine? Don't you ever make a mistake? I said, you want a mistake? I'll give you a mistake the next time. So I said, David's a dork with Dick, Don, and Duck. And that's the take he put in the commercial. I told that story on the Today Show, and all of a sudden, all the networks wanted to pull the commercial. I said, Load and Dork, and David's a dork, and, but they ended up leaving it on because I guess they figured it would already been running for months. And nobody complained.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so great. So obviously on the heels of the FedEx commercial, which has won tons of awards and is, it's just an amazing, iconic commercial.
I think
Um,
it's to this day, it's still the most award-winning commercial in the history of advertising.
yeah, I saw that as well. It's incredible. And to have, to be the main part of that entire commercial is just phenomenal. But that obviously was a springboard to, and I'll hold a couple up here from our youth, the little micro machines. I've got a whole collection of
Introducing the
them.
most miniature motorcade micro machines ever, all smaller than a nut. Not this one, this one. Remember, if it doesn't say micro machines, it's not the real thing.
Not the real thing. That's right. So, I mean,
125 commercials in 37 countries.
it's unbelievable. It really is truly
Mhm.
amazing. So with all those commercials, it was well over 100 that you did, right, for micro machines.
Yeah, 125 that aired. We
Were
would
there
go in every January. It was great because I would work like 4 days in January and then not have to work the rest of the year. And we would go in and they would have all the product line that they were going to try to sell at Toy Fair in February. So we'd do like 25, 30 commercials. And then they would take them to Toy Fair and some of the toys would sell and some wouldn't. So of the ones that actually aired was 125.
So of all those commercials, were there ever any that, like, when they kind of gave you the script of what they were going to have you do, were there ever any that you were like, oof, that doesn't seem
Well,
like a lot of
one
fun?
was we
Or
filmed in a sound stage that had no heat. It had air conditioning and it was January and it was very cold. And at 6 o'clock in the morning, the commercial they decide to shoot is Car Wash City, where I'm being pulled while people are squirting me with hoses and soap suds. And it's like, 30 below zero in the studio. I was like, this is not, and I couldn't see I had to read the teleprompter because there's too many words. And I couldn't see the teleprompter because they kept shooting my eyes with the foam and it took forever. And I was just like, ugh. But the rest of them were fine. I mean, I flew in one of them. That was fun. They put on this bald wig for me.
was that the
Which was fun.
highway
The
warrior?
highway
Was that
fireman.
with the yeah,
And what was really weird, so many of the commercials have my hand out like this, and then they have the stop motion with the cars. Well, I can't stand there and hold my hand. So they made a mold of my hand, which was on a C-stand in the studio.
No way.
You walk in and there's like your hand is like over here.
That's so wild.
Did you get to keep that? Did you get the hand?
I did
you-
not. I did not, unfortunately, because they had to, in case they had to do any reshoots or whatever, they had to keep my hand.
Yeah.
And they only made one of them, but it looked exactly like my hand. You wouldn't know the difference.
Now, did they give you, like, do you have like a massive collection of micro machines? Like,
I got one of everything, which I have 9 nephews. So I sent them to my sisters in New York. And I just kept a few I have a couple here.
yeah.
Not any particular ones that I liked or whatever. I just decided, I think I'll keep this box. One was a play set. It was a yellow box and it was filled with toys and cars. So I'll just keep that. But I sent the rest of them to my nephews who loved it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is really cool. Have you ever suffered any injuries? Bitten your tongue? Ate some hot pizza?
I have some days my mouth doesn't work, just doesn't want to. Sometimes there's a combination of words that just does not want to come out. And I have, well, as far as mouth injuries, I have bitten my tongue and bitten my cheek and done all that. But you get over that kind of stuff. I have had laryngitis a few times, very bad for that to happen. There is a fail-safe cure, which is really disgusting, but it works and it gets you through the day. And that is eating a spoon of Vaseline. And it's gross. And then I was doing another job for a phone company in Canada, and it was their press day. They were introducing their whole big winter lineup of stuff. And I had like 6 press conferences, and we shot a commercial, and we did all this other stuff, and everything was planned out through the whole day. And I was getting ready to get set for my next piece, and I was kind of walking and not paying attention. And I walked into a glass door and broke my nose 3 places.
My
And I mean, just blood just started going everywhere. And they're like, not saying, "How are you? Are you okay?" They're going, "Lean forward. That's the only shirt we have." So I'm like this, bleeding on the floor so I don't get blood on my white shirt. And they iced it and kept the swelling down enough. I finished the day. I did the press conferences. And then the next day I was getting my nose operated on.
Ooh.
So crazy. So I saw there was a game that was actually inspired by you. Were there any
Created
other
by me.
Okay, I didn't know that was yours creation, but that's awesome. Were there any other characters or roles that people created that were 100% inspired by your talent or anything like that?
I've had many things where people call and say, we want John in particular, where they'll do a role. Like in Adventure Time, I don't know why, but they wanted me to be the keeper. I'm the keeper. um, and there's been other thing like on Garfield, I did a fast thing on Pinky and the Brain. There was an episode called "You Said a Mouthful" about the sick sheep, sick of sucky sucker, or whatever. I don't remember, but so they've done that kind of stuff on Family Guy. I play the Federal Express guy having sex with the wife in like 2 seconds. What's the other one that he had? American Dad. I play a game show host. Mm-hmm. These are things that they called me for.
Very cool.
So, unfortunately, nothing besides Transformers, which of course was created for me as well.
Right.
I don't think any regular character. I've had a couple of regular characters that on shows that don't end up selling, so they don't count.
Sure.
It was really fun to research you. And I came across a video on YouTube, right? And it was your the scene you did in Sesame Street, and talk about unlocking a core memory. I was like, oh my God, like you're just like, oh my gosh. And that was just so funny, still made me smile. Was that your son, or did they just like hand you a baby?
No, that was just a baby that was there. And we had to, you can only hold a baby that young, you can only hold for like 30 seconds every 2 hours. I mean, so you have to really get ready. Everybody has to be ready. All right, bring the baby in. We'd have the, they called it the dummy baby, which I would hold, and they'd set up the shots. And then, okay, bring in the champ, and they bring in the real baby. And I would do that. Yeah, I worked for Warner Brothers for a couple of years, and of all places, Columbus, Ohio. They had the world's first two-way interactive cable system called Cube. And I was a producer-performer. Nickelodeon did all their shows there. I was one of the first shows on Nickelodeon. I had my own show called Nickel Flicks, which was also not only one of the first shows to air, it was the first show canceled. So that didn't work out too well either. It was like me. I played like a Sydney Greenstreet character in this big rattan chair, doing wraparounds for cliffhangers. Well, Nickelodeon's big thing was no violence, no whatever. Well, cliffhangers are all, someone's getting shot and going over a cliff, and so it wasn't exactly, they got a lot of slack for it. So that's why it wasn't because of me that the show got canceled. It was because of what the show was. But so I worked for a couple of years in Columbus, Ohio, and there was a point to all this, which I will remember probably at some point. But it seems in my senior moments, I'm 70 now, so things don't last that long. Well, not quite. I got a month before I turn 70. But we were talking about something that made me think about Ohio and
the Sesame Street.
No. Oh yes, you're absolutely correct. One of the guys I worked with in Ohio was the head writer for Children's Television Workshop. And he came up with those bits. And he also came up with, they had these, the show was called MathNet Adventures. It was a takeoff of Dragnet. And I played an insurance embezzler, Johnny Dollar, and his mother. So I was in drag on the show. And it was a movie. It was like, a full movie that they ran on PBS for schools and stuff. It was the case of the purloined policies. And that was good. But he was so funny. He wrote my favorite line, and it's just not that there's anything so special about it, but to me, it was my favorite line I ever said in the commercial. And that is, "If I was you, and I'm glad I'm not, because then we'd have to share our clothes." If I was you, and I'm glad we're not, because then we'd have to share our clothes. But there was something about that to this day just puts a grin on my face. I just love that line.
That's so great. So John, we all know you from all your commercial work and your movie and television work, but when you're not working, which seems like you have been prolific over all these years, working all the time, is there anything that's like your favorite pastime, your thing that you do when you're not working to just kind of relax and enjoy your time?
Well, I love being in plays. I love doing plays. Oh. That really just thrills me to death. I used to, when I lived in Manhattan, I would see every show on Broadway. and just go all the time. And that's always what I wanted to be. And I would audition for Broadway shows. I never got to do one, but I did some off-Broadway shows. So I like to, for most of the 80s and 90s, I couldn't do any out here because you have to, it's a commitment. It's months and months and months, you know. You rehearse for a month and then the show runs for 6 months or whatever. So I couldn't do it because I wasn't in town that much. But now that things have slowed down a bit, I've done about 9 or 10 shows. I'm going to do decades ago, I did Music Man, which is why I did You Got Trouble for my world's record.
Right, yeah.
Because I had played that character and I knew it. And now I'm going to be in the summer, I'm going to be in a production of Music Man, but I'm going to be, of course, not playing the Music Man because I'm too old. I'm going to be playing Mayor Shin, which will be fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. Very cool.
And I also go to theater a lot, and I go to movies, and you know.
Any
I'm sorry.
Any recommendations of movies you've seen recently for?
Well, for serious, I saw Cabrini. That was really good. For stupid, just nonstop. Are you effing kidding me? This is what they're going to do now. Ridiculousness. The latest Godzilla one. They had the Godzilla one just a couple of months ago. That was great. A Japanese one. That was. I was sitting there going, "Oh my god, this!" I'm like crying. It's a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
But then this last one that they had, I don't even remember what they're all kind of meld together.
Yeah.
They just kept pulling monsters out of their ass. I mean, all of a sudden now it's Godzilla, now it's King Kong, now it's Mothra, now it's Garthra. I'm like, are you kidding me? Come on already. But it was fun. I saw it in IMAX and in a 4D theater, so the sheets were shaking and doing all that stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
So it was, totally ridiculous, but a lot of fun.
Very cool. Nice.
Very cool. I did just see on Broadway the Harry Potter Cursed Child, which
Isn't that great?
It was so good. I really enjoyed that.
How they do that time shift effect.
Amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. It's like I was hemming and hawing about seeing it when it was, 412 hours long. And then because of COVID, they closed it. And they decided, well, we got time on our hands. Let's do some editing. And instead of making it an 8-hour event, we'll make it a 4-hour show. And they didn't lose any of the magic. They kept all the magic in there. And I saw the 4-hour version, and I didn't feel like I didn't have a whole story there. I felt I knew everything they were talking about. So it worked out. It worked out great. And the effects were great. The magic was great. And that time shift effect It was like, how did they just do that? My mind is just blown. And then they do it like 4 times, and it's amazing.
It was great. I really did enjoy it. So that was the most recent one I saw. So I thought I'd ask if. Oh wait, no, that's not true. I did see Wicked, which was really good too.
Yeah, Wicked and I have a long history. I was supposed to be playing what I was put up against the guy who was playing the wizard. And they wanted him to renew his contract, and he was holding out for more money. So they offered me the part, and then went back to him and said, well, you want to go? We already have, so-and-so lined up, and blah, 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 blah. And then they called me and said, no, he's staying. You're not doing it. And then they wanted me to go on the road, and I can't do that anymore. I spent 20 years in a hotel, and I can't, I'm not going to do 2 nights in Duluth. It's not happening. So then they got mad at me, and then they would, tease me occasionally over the last 15 years about going back to do it. But I would have loved to play the wizard because it's like the easiest. It's a piece of cake. You walk on Act 1, you have like one scene, you sing a song that's 35 seconds long. Act 2, you sing a song that's 1 minute and 45 seconds, and then you're in like the last scene, and that's it. And the rest of the time, you're playing video games on your telephone and you're dressing it. So.
Oh, that's funny.
And it still may work out at some point. The wizard can be any age; it doesn't matter. And then on stage, you can't tell the difference anyway.
True.
As long as I'm not in a wheelchair or need a cane, I should be okay.
I'll ask another question if you don't mind. When I was looking at your biography and all the stuff you've done, it's interesting. You would think that you would like be an auctioneer. Have you ever done that?
I have. My grandfather was an auctioneer. He used to auction tomatoes and watermelons for supermarket chains in New York down at the Fulton Market. I went with him several times. I have done. I've raised over $25 million. Doing charity auctions where I volunteer my time at benefits and things like that.
That's incredible.
And then do the live auction at the benefits. And the LA Times said no one can suck more money out of a room than John Moschitta Jr.
That's a newspaper clipping you want,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I did a pilot for a show which didn't sell called The Auctioneer.
Oh,
And it was about an auctioneer who takes a rapper. I played the auctioneer under his wings, and I did have to do regular auctioneering in the pilot. Um, and it was Bubba Sparks. Do you know Bubba Sparks, the rapper?
Okay,
He
yeah.
sounds
was
familiar.
yeah, well, I didn't know who he was. I mean, I know who he is now because I did a show with him. But
Yeah.
rap music I don't listen to. But yeah, he was kind of he was the star in me, and we filmed it in Tennessee, Nashville, and I had to do regular auctioning. But other than that, I did a wine auction one time for charity, which was a pretty straightforward. It wasn't like a fun auction, you know. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Believe me, it was like 700 bottles of wine I was auctioning,
Oh.
and it was co-hosted by Zsa Zsa Gabor and Sally Struthers.
Wow,
Oh
they
my
seem
god!
like a fun pair.
Oh my god! Zsa Zsa lived around the corner, and she would leave because my sections would be like 45 minutes, and then they would come on and do some stuff, and then I'd do another 45 minutes, and Zsa Zsa would go home and change, and then come back again. And it was for a charity that dealt with kids with cancer. And the kids would do pictures, draw pictures, and then after I would do the wine, it was at someone's big, top of a hill in Beverly Hills, in a big mansion. After I would take a break from doing the wine, they would come up and auction the pictures that these kids did. So this one picture comes up, and Zsa Zsa's holding it, and the kids are all sitting, they're all bald and sick and cancer, and they're all sitting in the front row. And Zsa Zsa says, "Well, look at this. She's only 8 years old. It's a wonderful picture that she did. She's so wonderful." And Sally Struthers leans over and says, "You're covering it. She's 18, not 8. You're covering the one with your finger." And she goes, "Well, for 18, it's a piece of crap."
Oh,
I was like, "Oh, that's a good one, Zsa Zsa. That's good. That's good. You want to point out the little cancer girl in the front row? Thank you."
wow.
Oh, man, that's
Wow.
crazy. Well, on the heels of it being a wine auction, that actually leads into a question about, you start your career. I'm sure you had probably like a big paycheck at some point that came along. Did you have like a big splurge of like a really good bottle of whiskey or wine or a new car or something like that that you kind of went out and did something
I
big
did
that
a
you
lot
would?
of traveling.
Okay.
I would usually do 1 6-week vacation a year, and they were usually pretty extravagant. Um,
Nice.
I would do them around when I was working, then I would decide where I was going to be. Like one year I was working in England, and then 6 weeks later I was working in England again. So I went to England, I did the job. Then I met up with 13 of us all together. We met up in Paris. We stayed in Paris for a few
Cool.
days. Then we flew to Cairo, and I rented a boat, and we went down the Nile for a week.
Nice.
And then 2 of us went to Israel for a week. And then I rented a house in Corfu, Greece, right on with a boat and a lake and whatever.
Yeah.
And 6 of us met up there again and stayed there. And then I went back to London. So I did a Africa trip where I was in Africa, went to Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe. I river rafted the Zambezi. I gorilla trekked. It was great.
It's truly incredible what a 12-year-old's aspiration to to learn to speak fast has done. I mean, it's incredible,
Crazy.
Yeah.
What a country, isn't it? What his name is?
Yeah.
What a country.
Yeah.
It's crazy. People say, "You do what for a living?" I talk fast. You do what for a living?
So great.
Oh. Any advice or pointers for a kid that wants to talk fast? I mean, just practice. What would any?
Well, just practice. The really important thing is diction. It doesn't matter if you're going fast or slow. If people can, if there's lots of slow people that have no diction, you can't understand what they're saying. So you really, just have to practice your diction, and then, it comes faster. Bell Laboratories in New Jersey did a study and found that most people can talk 9 to 11 words at an accelerated rate before their speech machinery begins to malfunction. So they at one point had wanted me to get hooked up to electrodes to find out why I could go longer than 11 words. But I never agreed to do that. And, now there's lots of rappers and things like, I listen to the rap and I think it's great. They go really fast and do whatever, but I can't understand really what anybody's saying. So the editor of the Guinness Book, who's no longer the editor of the Guinness Book, there were several people who just made my life miserable trying to beat my record all the time, and they weren't good. And it was just got to be nasty and stupid, and I ended up looking like an asshole some of the time, which was really bad. So but he always said that I was really, as far as he was concerned, the only one he could understand. And if you can't understand anyone, now for TV, for the record, you do 11 words a second, but for TV, I'm only doing, if there's visual reinforcement, 6 to 8 words a second. And if it's just like a radio commercial, just 4 to 6 words a second. So, it's a lot slower, and you could be a lot more clear. So I would just say, people should practice tongue twisters. She stood on the balcony, inexplicably mimicking him hiccuping and amicably welcoming him in. Or Papa Dada, Mama, Mama, Da 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 Da, Baba, Baba, Mama's a me, Mama, Daddy's a daddy, baby's a bad baby, Mama's a me, Mama, Daddy's a daddy, baby's a bad baby. La 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 la.
Jeez.
There's the sound of the peanut butter, pick butters, of course. My board game was all tongue twisters. It was called Motormouth, and it was all tongue twisters. You had rubber lips and a timer, and you get past the rubber lips, and you have to pick a card and say the tongue twister before the timer went off. So it was like hot potato, but talking fast.
Yeah, that's great.
We play a lot of games on our podcast. I think we're going to have to add that to our collection. We'll have to go.
It's really a fun game. They made two bad things happened with it. When we had the model that we sold it with, and then once the game was sold, it was put out by Tiger Toys, we added to the number of tongue twisters and made them more advanced and difficult, and we really spent a lot of time. In the beginning, it was mostly ones that people already knew just to sell the toy, and they put the wrong list in the game when it came out. So that was number one. And number two, it was released in the worst retail toy year in the history of the toy business. So it's when Toys R Us were going bankrupt and nobody was shopping and nobody had any money. And so, we sold a bunch of them, but not, it was literally at Kmart in the dollar bin, like in January.
Well, maybe 2025 is the year of the reissue of Motormouth, and we spin it back up.
It's still popular in Europe. It's called Tongue Tangle in Europe. And I don't have my picture isn't on. This one, my picture's on the cover, my picture's on the board, and my picture's on the cards. A little bit of an ego project. But in Europe, it's called Tongue Tangle, same exact game, but no me on the board.
Very cool. So I know we were going back and forth. You mentioned that you're doing some work with Netflix right now. Is there anything that the current projects you want to talk about a little bit or share with the audience?
There's a new thing that's happened especially gotten really bad since COVID, called the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. You can't audition for a laundry detergent commercial without sending an NDA. You won't tell anybody, what Tide is up to. It's crazy. So anything that I have other than doing Music Man this summer, I can't talk about. I have NDAs about, and literally the one from Netflix was like 20 pages long. I'm like, who is going to,
Yeah.
And when you do the dubbing, it's like, I have no idea what the show's about. I'm just doing the lines. I don't, who am I telling what? I don't even know what it's about, So,
well, we'll tell our audience to keep a lookout because John Moschitta may or may not be in an upcoming Netflix series. Is that okay to say?
Right. Yeah, no, you can say that. And I won't be in it. My voice will be in it. And I have a feeling, well, I don't know when they're going to get done with it. It's a little crazy. So yeah, I wouldn't, stay glued to the set for any reason. And based on what I did so far, it's not anything that you're going to be like, wow, that's really great. We're talking Emmys, I wouldn't worry about it.
Well, Greg and I are writing a screenplay, so we'll be sure to cast you with a major role in our screenplay. So,
well, that would be great. Joe Settlemeyer wanted to do a feature. He wanted to go into features, and he wrote a feature. And I was going to play one of the leads, and he was doing it with Universal, and Universal had a contract with Rodney Dangerfield, and Rodney Dangerfield had to be the lead in his movie, which Joe wasn't wild about, but it's his first movie, whatever. And Universal told Joe, you have script approval, you have this, you have this, you have this. And they told Rodney Dangerfield the same exact thing. So on the first day of shooting, everybody showed up. Rodney showed up with his version of the script. Joe showed up with his. They were considerably different, and the project got canceled. So would have been too bad, because it would have been, I'm sure, hysterical. Because Joe is so funny. You can sit and watch. He has a game called Commercial Crazies. Remember back in the 80s and 90s, there was that phase where you had VCR games where you put the tape in the VCR and then you would pause it and there'd be a question and then you'd start it again and do whatever. And he has one called Commercial Crazies, which a couple of my commercials are in. That has all of his commercials, and they're just great. You can also watch them online, and there's a couple of documentaries about him as well. But his stuff is just, you go like, oh my God, how'd this guy even think of it? He's the only director in any form, way, shape, or form, TV, movies, commercials, theater, whatever, who said to me, John, this is what it's going to look like when I'm done. And it did. People came close, but they never. This was exactly what he said you were going to get. You got exactly what he said.
That's awesome. Very cool.
Cool.
Yeah. So I think, go ahead.
Go ahead. No.
No, I just want to say again, like how great it is to have the opportunity to talk to you and get to know a little bit of, the story behind the man, because I know it's been said before, but like so much of our youth and the commercials were such a big part of it that, micro machines were cool, but seeing you on the TV, celebrating the fun that those toys had was a big part of our childhood, and it's just so cool to be able to have the opportunity to talk to you. So
well, thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity. I'm glad to have been a part of that. I'll occasionally do conventions where you sit there and sign autographs and do whatever. Usually it's in conjunction with the Transformers, and I am just bowled over by how many people come up and say exactly what you just did about you're my whole childhood, and I watched on Saved by the Bell, and and when I was doing the Sesame Streets, I would literally be in the supermarket and be stared down by 3-year-olds, because they would recognize me, and I would have mothers say to me, I don't know why she's looking at you like that. She never does it. And I said, well, because I'm on Sesame Street. And they'd go like, oh, okay. It's a little weird to be like, nailed by a 3-year-old in a supermarket.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this was fantastic. It was so great to talk to you, and thanks for sharing those great stories and being a part of our childhood. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. My pleasure. You guys have a great weekend. It was great talking with you. And
awesome. Thank you.
That be that.
Tim, did you know that listeners should like, review, and subscribe to the Latch-Key Dads podcast?
No. But now I know.
Knowing exactly about it.